We booked the cabin on a Thursday. I remember because we were both at work, bored, scrolling through vacation rentals like we always did when life felt heavy. The plan was to get out of the city for the weekend. We wanted a place with no reception, no people, no noise, somewhere off-grid but not off reality. The listing was simple: secluded mountain cabin, no cell service, peace and quiet guaranteed. It even mentioned a working landline for emergencies. That last part gave me peace of mind. I was nervous about going too far off-grid, but the landline felt like a safety net. We arrived Friday afternoon after a 5-hour drive. The last 30 minutes were down rough gravel roads that wound deeper and deeper into the woods. The trees got thicker, the light got dimmer. There weren't any signs, just GPS giving up and our best guess guiding us down paths that barely looked driven. The cabin was small, tucked at the edge of a clearing with thick trees pressing in from every direction. No other buildings, no other cars, no noise. I killed the engine and we sat for a moment, just letting the quiet surround us. It was unnerving at first, how silent it was. No birds, no wind, just dead still air. The place was exactly like the photos. Weathered wood siding, a steep A-frame roof, a little front porch with a chair and nothing else. We brought our bags inside and did a walkthrough. The inside was rustic, one main room with a kitchenette, a stone fireplace, a small couch, and a wooden ladder leading up to a loft where the bed was. The bathroom was tiny. Everything smelled like wood and dust, like it hadn't been cleaned in a while but hadn't rotted either. A place forgotten but not abandoned. The landline phone sat on a little table near the window. One of those old rotary types, beige plastic, dusty, but charming in a vintage way. I picked it up, curious. No dial tone, just silence. I tried again. Nothing. I checked the cord. It ran along the floor and disappeared into the wall. But when I followed it, I realized something strange. The cord wasn't connected to anything. It just fed through a small hole in the paneling, but there was no jack, no wire leading anywhere.
Justa prop.
Fake. I remember just standing there, staring at the phone, realizing that the one line of communication out, the thing that was supposed to be there if something went wrong, wasn't real. And that meant the person who listed the cabin knew it too. They lied. It wasn't just missing. It was never connected in the first place. Still, I brushed it off, told myself we wouldn't need it. We'd brought everything we needed: food, water, flashlights. Our phones were dead zones, as expected, but that was part of the reason we came. To unplug, to be alone. That night, we made a simple dinner. We sat on the porch as the sun dropped below the tree line. The woods looked black by the time twilight faded. The temperature dropped fast. We went inside and lit a fire. There was a pile of dry wood already stacked in the fireplace. That should have been another warning sign. It was too dry, too neatly stacked, like someone had just done it. Not months ago, recently. We went to bed in the loft with the window cracked. The air was still. Couldn't sleep much. Every creak in the cabin, every shift of the wood, every rustle outside kept me half awake. There was no wind, no animals, no bugs tapping the windows, just stillness. I remember staring at the ceiling, waiting for my brain to calm down, waiting to feel relaxed. But something about the silence was wrong. It wasn't peaceful. It was expectant, like something was listening. In the morning, I got up early. The light was pale and gray, filtered through the trees. I went outside to get the small cooler from the car. That's when I noticed the passenger side door was open. Just slightly, not wide, just ajar. I knew we had locked it. I walked around the car, checking it. The trunk was closed. Nothing was missing. But when I opened the hood out of paranoia, I saw it. The battery cables were cut. Both of them. Clean cuts. Not chewed. Not frayed. Snipped. I just stood there for a while. Not moving. Not breathing. Just trying to process it. My heart was thudding in my chest. Someone had been here. Someone had sabotaged the only way we had out. Not nature. Not coincidence. Someone did this on purpose. I went inside, heart pounding, and double-checked the doors and windows. Locked, but the locks were simple. Nothing that would stop someone if they really wanted to get in. We tried our phones again. Still no signal. We walked a few yards into the woods, waving them around. Nothing. Total dead zone. There were no tools in the cabin. No wire, no extra parts, not even a pair of pliers. Just a dull hatchet by the fireplace and some nails in a drawer. No toolbox, no emergency kit. It felt intentional, like someone had set the cabin up to look stocked and safe but made sure nothing useful was actually there. We decided to wait until noon. If no one showed up by then, no other renters, no owner, no forest ranger, we'd start walking. There was a note in the listing that said a creek ran a mile downhill behind the cabin. It supposedly connected to a fire road. If we could find that, we could eventually flag someone down. By noon, the silence hadn't changed. No planes overhead, no animals, no other cars, just the woods pressing in around us like a vacuum. So we packed some water, put on our boots, and headed out. Not 10 minutes into the hike, we hit something that stopped us cold. A line of rusted barbed wire strung tightly between two trees, right at shin level. It was nearly invisible until you were on top of it. If we'd been running or walking fast, we would have hit it hard. It wasn't natural. It wasn't old fencing. It was placed there recently on purpose. And now it was between us and the road. We turned back. We moved slowly, scanning the trees. I kept thinking I saw shapes. Figures behind trunks, movement in the corners of my eyes. But every time I looked, there was nothing. No sound. Just that pressing stillness. Back at the cabin, I started pulling the furniture against the door. The couch, the table. I shut the windows and nailed a blanket over the loft opening so nothing could peek in. We didn't eat. We just sat, back against the wall, holding the kitchen knife between us like it meant something. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat upright in the loft, flashlight in hand, listening. Around 3 a.m., I heard a slow creak. One single wooden step from the porch. Just one. Then silence. Nothing followed. No knock. No movement. Just one board flexing under weight. In the morning, I found a footprint in the dirt near the front step. Just one, clear as day. It wasn't ours. It was bigger, heavier. The heel had sunk into the mud, like the person had stood there for a long time. We needed to get out. I remembered something. I had packed a spare phone charger that ran off an old battery bank. I hooked it up, booted my phone, and tried the GPS even though there was no signal. Amazingly, the map loaded from when we were last online. We were 8 miles from the nearest ranger station across rough, wooded terrain. I rechecked the battery cables. One was completely severed, but the other just had the rubber cut. I stripped the ends of the wires with the kitchen knife and twisted them together. No guarantee it would work, but it was a shot. I went inside, told her to grab everything and be ready. I turned the key. Nothing. Dead. I waited. Tried again. A weak click. Then another. The engine groaned, stuttered, and came to life. I didn't hesitate. I threw it into gear and drove hard down the trail. I didn't stop. I didn't slow. Branches scraped the sides of the car. The gravel thudded under the tires. But I didn't care. After what felt like forever, the trees broke. The signal bars came back. I pulled into a gas station, shaking, barely breathing. We told the clerk. He called the sheriff. We went back that afternoon with a deputy. But the cabin was different. The fake phone was gone, replaced with a working one. The firewood was gone. The barbed wire? Gone. The footprint? Wiped. Even the battery cables were replaced. Someone had cleaned the place, covered their tracks. The listing disappeared that night. The profile that posted it was deleted. No reviews, no owner, nothing. It was like the place never existed. We never got answers. No suspects, no evidence. But I know what we saw. I know someone was out there, watching, waiting, planning. And I know that if the battery hadn't started, we might still be there. Or worse, we'd be gone, and nobody would ever know where we went. We rented the cabin for a week. It was meant to be quiet, off the grid, surrounded by woods. One of those disconnect and recharge types of getaways. The place was listed as rustic but updated, with just enough modern touches to keep things comfortable. No internet, no TV, and spotty cell service, but the pictures looked clean, the fireplace looked cozy, and the idea of being away from everything sounded like exactly what we needed. The drive up took nearly 6 hours. We followed winding roads deeper into a forested area with very little signage. We passed a few driveways with rusted-out mailboxes, but no homes we could see from the road. The trees got denser the further we went. By the time we turned down the gravel road that led to the cabin, we were completely surrounded by forest, not a neighbor in sight. The cabin looked just like the pictures, single-story, weathered wood siding, a small front porch, and a steep, mossy roof. It had this look of being recently fixed up but still old at its core. The front door stuck a little when I opened it, like it hadn't been used in a while. The interior had a main room with a fireplace, a worn but clean couch, a tiny kitchen, and a hallway that led to the bedroom and a bathroom. There was a door in the hallway we weren't supposed to open. The listing had mentioned a locked basement that was off-limits due to mold issues. When we arrived, everything felt normal, quiet like expected. The air smelled like trees and damp wood. We dropped our bags, opened the windows to air things out, and tried to settle in. The first night was uneventful. We cooked a simple meal on the propane stove, sat outside on the porch until the mosquitoes drove us back in, and read by lantern light until we got tired. It was cold by the time we got into bed, and I remember being grateful for the heavy blankets and the silence outside. No traffic, no sirens, just still woods. It was maybe the second night that we heard the first noise. I woke up around 3 a.m., needing to pee. I got up, walked down the hallway, and while I was in the bathroom, I heard something, faint, a light sound like a knock or something shifting below me. I froze, holding my breath, and it happened again. Not loud, but clear. Something was moving under the floor. I stood there for a minute, listening. The cabin had an old crawlspace feel, the kind where sounds carried strangely. I figured it might be an animal. Maybe a raccoon or something got into the walls or under the house. I convinced myself of that and went back to bed. The next morning, I checked around outside. The cabin sat on a slight slope, and at the back, you could see where the foundation exposed a basement level. The ground was damp from recent rain, and the only visible window into the basement was foggy and covered in spiderwebs. I got closer and peeked in, expecting to see storage junk or maybe signs of rot, but all I could make out was darkness and a shape that looked like an old table. I tried the basement door, even though I already knew it was locked. It was a heavy wooden door with a padlock on the outside. The lock was old but not rusted. It looked like it had been used recently. The ground around the door was muddy, but there were no obvious footprints, just water pooled up in little divots. Still, something about the door bugged me. Why lock a moldy basement from the outside? That night, the noise came back. I wasn't the only one who heard it this time. It was louder, slow, dragging sounds, like something heavy brushing against the floorboards beneath us. Then short, quick sounds like footsteps. We sat up in bed, listening. The sounds would stop for a few minutes, then come again, always in short bursts. Not rhythmic, not animal-like, more like pacing. I got up again in the early hours and stood in the hallway. The noise was clearer there, right under the floor. I stood above the locked door that led to the basement. I knocked once on the floor with my heel. Nothing. Then, maybe a minute later, a quiet thud from below, like someone bumped into something. The next day, I decided to figure out how to get into the basement. The noises weren't just animals. Something or someone was down there. I walked the perimeter again and found a narrow gap under the porch, maybe wide enough to crawl through. I got a flashlight and lay flat, sliding myself under the boards until I reached the other side, where I could see the basement window better. The glass was dirty, but the inside looked cleaner than I expected. I saw a sleeping bag, a couple of food wrappers, and a plastic water jug. This wasn't an abandoned, moldy basement. Someone had been down there recently. That changed everything. I backed out, went around to the basement door, and inspected the padlock more closely. It wasn't just latched. It was locked with a thick, modern master padlock. I wasn't comfortable with leaving it alone anymore, so I went back inside and looked for anything I could use. Eventually, I found a long iron fireplace poker and a pair of pliers in a drawer. It took a while, but after some work, I managed to force the latch up with the poker and pop the lock open. The basement door creaked hard when I pulled it open. A musty, stale smell rolled out. Not quite mold, more like old dirt and wet wood. The air was cold. The stairs were narrow and steep, and the light didn't reach all the way down. I used my flashlight, heart pounding, and went down one slow step at a time. The basement was bigger than I expected. A low ceiling, concrete floor, and support beams wrapped in insulation. There were shelves on the far side with canned food and old tools, and in the back corner, I saw what I'd glimpsed through the window: a sleeping bag, a small pile of clothes, a lantern, a book, and an empty tin can with a spoon in it. None of it was covered in dust. Everything looked recent. The can was clean, the spoon still damp like it had just been used. There were footprints in the dust near the steps, one set going back and forth across the room. They weren't mine. I checked behind the support beams and found a plastic bag stuffed with granola bars, a water bottle, and a cheap disposable phone, the kind you buy at gas stations. The phone was dead. Next to it was a small, folding pocket knife. Open. I felt this deep, heavy pressure in my chest. Someone had been living here, maybe still was. Maybe they'd heard us upstairs and hid when we came down. Or maybe they were out and would be back soon. I didn't stay long. I snapped a few pictures with my phone and left, locking the door again with the busted padlock and stacking some heavy rocks in front of it. It wouldn't keep someone in or out, but it gave me a little peace of mind. We spent the rest of the day packing. I didn't say much, just moved quickly. We decided to leave first thing in the morning. That night, the noises didn't come from below. They came from outside, crunching footsteps in the gravel. Slow, deliberate, circling the cabin. We turned off all the lights and sat in the dark, barely breathing. The sound stopped and started again. I couldn't tell if it was one person or more. I held the fireplace poker in my lap and stayed awake all night. Sometime near dawn, the noises stopped. As soon as the sun was up, we loaded the car and left. We didn't look back. I reported what I found to the rental site. I sent them the pictures, explained the situation. They removed the listing, but I never heard anything back. No follow-up, no explanation. I don't know if the property owner was letting someone stay there, or if someone was squatting without permission. Either way, we weren't supposed to be alone. And now, when I think about that basement, I always wonder, did we interrupt someone living there? Or did they want us to find it? Either way, we weren't as alone as we thought. And that door, it was locked from the outside. Who were they trying to keep out or in? I've always liked white noise when I sleep. Some people need silence, but not me. I've gotten used to the low hum of a box fan or the whir of a small camping fan when I'm out in the woods. It's kind of like a mental blanket, something that smooths over every little creak and rustle so my mind doesn't go imagining worst-case scenarios every time a twig snaps. It's helped me sleep through more than one rainy night in a tent, far from anything even remotely resembling civilization. But after what happened last summer, I don't know if I'll ever be able to sleep with that sound again. It was a solo trip, as most of mine are. I'd taken a few days off work in early August and wanted to get away from everything: emails, traffic, people. That whole summer had been a grind. I'd been working long hours at the hospital where I'm a night nurse, and between stress and back-to-back shifts, I was stretched thin. Being out in the woods was my way of recalibrating. I chose a spot deep in the Tennessee hills, not far from Fall Creek Falls, but well off the beaten path. A friend of mine had tipped me off to an old logging road that wound up into a ridge system the park didn't maintain anymore. The road was long abandoned, mostly overgrown, but I had four-wheel drive and patience. I parked where the road became too narrow and hiked another 2 miles into a small clearing near a rock outcrop that overlooked a forest basin. I'd camped there once before with a buddy of mine 2 years earlier, and it had been peaceful. No traffic, no lights, not even aircraft overhead. Just endless trees, insects, birds, and if you were lucky, a glimpse of deer or a fox early in the morning. I set up my single-person tent, unrolled my sleeping pad, and set up the small battery-powered fan I'd brought along. I only ever used it during summer trips, and it had always worked like a charm. Small enough to clip to the tent's gear loop, but strong enough to move air and keep mosquitoes away. After camp was ready, I cooked up some beans and rice over my stove, sipped some instant coffee, and just sat there watching the sun drop behind the ridge line. The sky went from gold to blue to a deep velvet black, stars spilling across it like shattered glass. By the time I turned in, it was quiet. Still, too still. You get used to a certain rhythm in the woods, tree frogs, wind in the leaves, owls calling from distant limbs. But that night, it was like someone had hit mute. My fan kicked on with a gentle hum, and I welcomed the noise. The air was hot and heavy, and sweat clung to my back even as I laid still inside the tent. Sometime around midnight, I woke up with a weird feeling in my stomach. No noise, no movement, just a tightness in my chest and this strange awareness that something felt off. The kind of feeling you get when you've left the front door unlocked or think you've forgotten the stove on back at home. I listened. Nothing. Not even the bugs. Then I realized the fan was off. I sat up, confused, blinking into the dark. My small lantern was still clipped to the side wall, so I clicked it on. The soft light spilled across the inside of the tent. Everything was where I left it. My boots near the door. My pack zipped up at my feet. Water bottle half full beside me. But the fan was dead. No red light, no sound, nothing. I figured the battery had died early, which was odd, because I'd fully charged it before leaving. Still, maybe it was just a glitch. I unplugged and replugged the little battery pack I used for the fan, tapped the button, but it didn't respond. That's when I heard something outside. Just a soft sound, softer than a breeze, like leaves brushing together. Then a click. It wasn't near the tent. It was maybe 20 or 30 feet away, out beyond the edge of the clearing where the thick forest began. Just a single sound, but sharp enough to pull every muscle in my body tight. I held still, lantern still on. Then another sound, this one closer. A dull thud, like someone putting their boot down carefully but catching a root. Now, I've done enough solo camping to know when animals are nearby. A deer is unmistakable with its delicate, snapping twigs. Coyotes are vocal and move quickly. Raccoons make a mess and chatter. This wasn't any of that. This was slow, quiet, deliberate. I turned the lantern off, and I waited. Whatever it was, it stopped moving too. I laid down slowly, keeping my ears open, every breath shallow. I waited for minutes, maybe longer. I started to wonder if I imagined it, but then something brushed the side of the tent. Not hard, just barely a contact. A fingertip maybe, or a stick. It slid downward, a slow, steady line from the top corner to the middle of the tent's side. I didn't breathe. Another noise, this one right above me. A low creak, barely audible, like weight shifting on a tree branch, except there was nothing above my tent but open space. I stayed frozen. I didn't unzip the door. I didn't call out. I didn't move. Eventually, the night resumed its rhythm. The bugs returned. Crickets chirped. Distant rustling resumed in the brush like normal forest activity. Whatever had been there was gone. The next morning, I got out and did a slow inspection of the area around my tent. Nothing looked tampered with. No trash scattered, no gear moved. But there were prints. Not boot prints, just impressions in the moss and dirt, half-formed. I couldn't tell if they were from shoes or bare feet. They were small but not childlike, narrow, light. I tried to convince myself they were mine from the night before. I spent the day hiking a nearby ridge, but my mind wasn't on the views. Every corner I turned, I expected to see someone. Every break in the trees made me uneasy. I never saw anyone else that day, not a single other hiker or camper. And by the time I got back to camp, the heat had settled in again. Still no power in the fan. I left it off and told myself it didn't matter. But that night was worse. Started the same. Quiet. Too quiet. No wind, no frogs, no insects. Just a dead calm that felt unnatural. I kept the lantern off. I laid still, not asleep, just listening. Sometime around 1 a.m., I heard it again. Movement. Soft crunching steps. Then a dragging noise. something sweeping lightly through leaves. Not in circles, just a straight path across the edge of the clearing. Then another sound, 3 taps. Rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. Like someone knocking with a stick against a tree trunk. Then silence. The fan flicked on. I didn't touch it. It was off all day, battery supposedly dead. But now it was on, whirring lightly above my head. That scared me more than anything else. Because it wasn't just a sound outside. It was something inside now. The fan was on, and I hadn't turned it on. I grabbed my headlamp and flicked it on immediately, shining it around the tent. Nothing. Still zipped up. Nothing disturbed. No movement inside. But the fan kept spinning. I switched it off, and it switched back on again. I ripped the battery pack out of it, shut it down hard. My heart was racing, hands clammy. I had never felt so vulnerable. I didn't sleep. I didn't even lie back down. I just sat upright until dawn, holding my knife and my flashlight like some kind of rookie camper who hadn't prepared at all. When the first pale light crept into the sky, I broke camp faster than I ever had. I packed everything, tent, gear, stove, in under 10 minutes. I didn't eat. I didn't brush my teeth. I didn't even change my socks. I started the hike out. 2 miles of watching every tree trunk, every branch. I moved quickly, too quickly in places, and tripped twice. The forest still felt heavy, like it hadn't shaken whatever had been in it the night before. I made it to my car by mid-morning, tossed my gear in the back seat, peeled off my sweaty shirt, and turned the engine over. Then the fan in my back seat turned on. It was still connected to its battery pack. I hadn't even noticed it when I threw everything in, but it was on now, whirring gently, like nothing had happened. I stopped breathing for a second, reached back slowly, turned it off, and unplugged it entirely. I drove for hours, didn't stop until I hit the state line. Checked into a roadside in that reeked of mildew and old carpet, but I didn't care. I just needed a locked door and walls. That night, I laid in bed, fan off, no sound, and I barely slept. Even now, I don't know what the right answer is. Fan on or off, which is worse. All I know is that out there, in that empty forest, something was watching me. Something that knew just when to move, just how to stay quiet, and maybe somehow just how to get into my gear, my head, my space. I haven't been back since. I still camp sometimes, but only with other people, and never with that fan. Because now, that sound, what used to soothe me, only brings one thing to mind. That moment when the fan kicks on in the dark, and I don't remember pressing the button. We booked the cabin as a group. 4 of us, longtime friends trying to get away from city life for a long weekend. It was early fall, cool enough for jackets but not freezing, and the cabin was remote, nestled somewhere in northern Oregon. It was one of those places that didn't show up on Google Maps until you zoomed way in, and even then, the only label was private property. That's how secluded it was. The listing looked decent. It wasn't luxurious, but the photos made it seem clean and well-maintained. There was a big living room, 2 small bedrooms, a kitchen, a fireplace, and lots of woods in every direction. It was advertised as a digital detox, no internet, no cell service, and supposedly no distractions. The drive out took most of a Friday. We followed winding roads, a couple gravel stretches, and at one point, a hand-painted sign that just said cabin with an arrow. It was evening when we got there. The sun was low, and the trees cast long shadows. The place looked just like the pictures, maybe a bit dustier. Inside, it smelled faintly like cedar and old stone. There was a locked cabinet in the corner, probably cleaning supplies, and a fuse box on the far wall next to a note from the owner saying the electricity could flicker but would come back on. Seemed normal enough. We unpacked our stuff, lit a fire in the fireplace, and cooked dinner with what we brought in a cooler. That first night was uneventful. We drank a bit, played cards, talked about old memories. When it got cold, we all crashed. 2 of us in one bedroom, the others on the couch and a cot we found in the closet. The next morning was when things started to feel off. I was the first one awake. I'm always the early riser in any group. I made coffee, walked around outside a little, and went to use the bathroom. That's when I noticed a blinking light in the vent above the toilet. It was small, faint, one of those tiny red LEDs that blinks slowly, on, off, on again. It was recessed deep into the vent grill. At first, I thought it was maybe part of the heating system, but the cabin didn't have central air, just wall heaters. So I got a chair, stood up, and took the vent cover off. Behind the grill, nestled against the metal duct, was a small black object. A camera. It was the kind you can get online for cheap, smaller than a golf ball, with a fisheye lens and a power cable. The wire went deeper into the duct, disappearing down into the floor. I didn't touch it. I just stared at it for a while, trying to make sense of it. Eventually, I put the grill back on without telling anyone. I went outside and walked around the cabin, trying to calm down. The quiet of the woods didn't help. It made it worse. My mind kept looping. Who would put a camera in a bathroom vent? When the others woke up, we ate breakfast and hung around inside. I couldn't stop thinking about that camera. I started checking the other vents. Most of them looked normal. Then I checked behind a bookshelf in the living room and found a thin wire running vertically down the wall into the floorboards. It was pressed into a groove behind the trim and painted over, like someone had tried to hide it, but not well. I didn't say anything to the group yet. I kept looking. Under the kitchen sink, inside the vent above the couch, and then behind a small painting near the fireplace, I found another camera. This one tucked behind the frame, just a black eye peeking out. I pulled the painting off the wall. The camera was held in place with tape, and its wire ran straight into a small drilled hole in the wood paneling. That's when I spoke up. We all stopped what we were doing, and I told them what I'd found. No one believed it at first until I showed them the one behind the painting. After that, it turned into a full-on search. We found 5 cameras in total. 1 in the bathroom vent, 1 behind the painting, 1 in the corner of the living room near the ceiling, 1 under the coffee table pointing up between the couch cushions, and 1 inside the bedroom vent pointed directly at the bed. All of them were wired. No batteries, no Wi-Fi, just wires. We started tracing the cables. They weren't just bundled in the walls, they were going somewhere. All of them ran downward into the floor through drilled holes. At first, we figured maybe they connected to a power supply in the crawl space or basement, but the cabin didn't have a basement. We'd walked all around the outside and never saw any door or stairs. That led us to search for a trapdoor or hatch. Eventually, we found it. A thin seam in the pantry floor beneath an old throw rug. When we pulled the rug aside, there was a rectangular cutout, just big enough for a person to squeeze through. No handle, but it had a small metal ring bolted to the wood. We pried it open. Underneath was a narrow wooden ladder leading into darkness. The smell coming up from the hatch was stale, like dry soil and insulation. We dropped a flashlight down by the cord and saw packed earth walls, plywood, and old wiring stapled in rows. I didn't want to go down there. None of us did, but it felt worse to not know. So I went first. The ladder creaked the whole way down. The space below wasn't really a basement, more like a man-made crawl space. It was about 5 feet tall, dug out of the dirt under the cabin, maybe 12 feet long. Someone had reinforced the ceiling with boards and strung a few bare light bulbs along a wire. At the far end, there was a folding table covered in dust and a few boxes. And then I saw it, a small black DVR box with blinking lights. Every camera wire fed into it. A monitor sat on the table beside it, unplugged but clearly used recently. The screen had fingerprints all over it. Beside the monitor was a thick binder full of notes. The boxes had more gear, coiled wires, old cameras, and one folder filled with printed screenshots. All of the screenshots were from inside the cabin. Different people, different years, all in various states of undress, sitting on the couch, using the bathroom, changing clothes. There were dozens of faces. None of them were us. All strangers, tourists, couples, families. Every room had been under surveillance. Someone had been watching people here for years. I backed away from the table and got out of there. When I came back up, the others knew something was wrong by the look on my face. I told them what I saw. We all agreed we had to leave. We packed in a rush. No one said a word. It was that kind of silence that's thick and heavy, like everyone's holding their breath at the same time. The woods around us, which felt peaceful before, now felt like they were pressing in too close. I kept glancing toward the trees, wondering if someone was out there, watching us even now. When we got to the car, I unlocked it and tossed my bag into the trunk. That's when I saw the dash. The glove compartment had been opened. I never leave it open. I checked inside. The papers had been moved around. My spare keys were gone. I had a sinking feeling, like the ground tilted under me. Someone had been in the car. I ran back to the cabin and checked the perimeter again. Nothing looked disturbed. No footprints, but the dirt and leaves could hide tracks easily. We drove off without looking back, all of us dead silent until we hit the main road. Once we had service, we called the police and the rental platform. The cops took a report but didn't sound surprised. The platform shut down the listing, but I never got a straight answer from them either. I don't know who set up that system. I don't know how long it had been running, but based on the screenshots, someone had been doing this for years. Quietly, patiently, watching strangers live out their weekends, completely unaware. I still think about that red light in the vent. How long was it blinking before I saw it? How much of our trip had already been recorded? And worse, what would have happened if we hadn't found it? Or if we stayed one more night? We never got answers, but I'll never stay in a remote rental again. Not without checking every vent, every wall, and especially the floor. Because sometimes the cabin isn't abandoned. It's active. You just don't know who's on the other side of the camera. And you probably never will. I was really looking forward to this weekend. After weeks of stress at work, my partner and I decided to get away from the city and book a cozy Airbnb in the countryside. It looked perfect in the pictures. A small, rustic cabin nestled among the trees, with large windows and a warm, inviting living room. The host had great reviews, and the price was reasonable for the area. We wanted a quiet place to relax, cook simple meals, and just get away from it all. We arrived late Friday afternoon after a long drive. The sun was already low, casting an orange glow through the pine trees as we pulled up. The cabin sat back from the road, down a narrow gravel driveway that crunched under the tires. There was a small porch with a couple of rocking chairs and a grill off to the side. The air smelled fresh and clean, with hints of wood smoke from nearby chimneys. Inside, the place was exactly like the pictures. Clean, warm, and well kept. There was a little kitchen with a stove, fridge, and some basic supplies. The living room had a small couch and a wood-burning stove that looked ready for a fire. Upstairs was a loft bedroom with a big bed and soft blankets. We unpacked quickly, then went out to explore the small property, which had a few walking paths through the woods behind the cabin. That first night, everything felt peaceful. We made dinner, drank some wine, and sat on the porch watching the stars come out. It was the kind of quiet that settles into your bones and makes you forget about all the noise and stress of everyday life. We slept well in the soft bed, waking up to birdsong and sunlight streaming through the windows. The next day was even better. We made pancakes in the morning, then took a long walk down the trail behind the cabin. The woods were thick but quiet, except for the occasional rustle of squirrels and the call of a distant hawk. We found a small creek and sat on the rocks, just listening to the water run. It felt like we were the only people in the world. Back at the cabin, we spent the afternoon reading and napping. It was one of those days where time seems to slow down and nothing feels urgent. We cooked dinner again and stayed up late, talking about everything and nothing. It was during that second night that I first noticed the blinking light. We were getting ready for bed, brushing our teeth and changing into pajamas. I caught a quick flash of red from the smoke detector mounted on the ceiling near the bedroom door. It was faint but definitely there, an almost rhythmic blink every few seconds. I didn't think much of it at first. I assumed it was just a battery indicator or a regular test light. Smoke detectors often blink red when the batteries are low or when they're in test mode, but something about the blinking felt off. It wasn't the slow, steady blink I was used to. It was quicker and more mechanical. Curiosity got the better of me. After we went to bed and turned off the lights, I took out my phone and used the flashlight to get a better look. The smoke detector was an older model but seemed intact. When I moved closer, I noticed the blinking light wasn't coming from the smoke detector's normal LED. Instead, it was from a tiny hole near the edge of the unit. I squinted. It looked like a small lens. I froze for a second. Could it be a camera? I hesitated, but then carefully reached up and removed the smoke detector from the ceiling. It came off easily, and when I held it in my hand, I realized the front panel was a little different from a standard smoke detector. The lens was definitely there, concealed behind a tiny, pinhole-sized black circle. My heart started pounding. Someone had hidden a camera inside the smoke detector. I felt a wave of shock and anger. Who would do this? How long had it been there? Had we been recorded the entire time? I showed my partner immediately. They looked just as disturbed as I felt. We went through the cabin, checking for any other suspicious devices or signs of tampering, but didn't find anything else. I took pictures of the camera, the smoke detector, and the spot where it had been mounted. Then I wrote a detailed message to the host on the Airbnb app, explaining what we'd found and demanding an explanation. I also contacted Airbnb support right away, reporting the hidden camera and requesting a full investigation. The host responded quickly, apologizing and saying they had no idea about the camera. They claimed it must have been installed by a previous guest or contractor and promised to remove it immediately. Airbnb took our report seriously and assured us they would review the listing and take appropriate action. But even with the host's apology and Airbnb's response, the damage was done. The feeling of violation stuck with me. The idea that someone had secretly watched us in what was supposed to be a private space was terrifying. Every time I thought about it, I felt exposed and unsafe. We cut our weekend short and left the cabin the next morning, both of us feeling shaken and unable to relax anymore. The quiet and calm we came for were completely gone. After returning home, I kept replaying everything in my mind. How the camera was so cleverly hidden, how I only noticed it because of the blinking light, how easily someone could have invaded our privacy. I wondered if this was more common than people realized. How many other people had stayed in that cabin without knowing? It took me weeks to stop feeling paranoid in my own home. Every new noise or blinking light made me check for cameras. I even bought a small camera detector to scan rental places I stayed in afterward. Eventually, Airbnb removed the listing and banned the host from their platform after their investigation confirmed the camera's presence and failure to disclose it. But for me, the violation stayed. No apology or refund could undo the sense of being watched and the loss of trust. Looking back, the experience was a hard reminder that even places that seem safe and welcoming can hide dangers. It's made me far more cautious about where I stay and what I look for, and I never ignore blinking lights on smoke detectors anymore. We'd been hiking for years together, my girlfriend and I. It was something we leaned into more and more the older we got. Less drinking, fewer parties, more long weekends out in the woods. There was a peace in it. Something about the repetition of putting one foot in front of the other and the silence of nature that made everything else go quiet for a while. This time we rented a small cabin near a lake in northern Idaho. It was a spot I'd bookmarked months earlier, saved on a whim after coming across photos of it online. The listing made it look rustic but comfortable, with stove, small kitchen, decent hiking nearby. I double-checked that there were trails close to the cabin and booked it for a long weekend in September. We drove up Thursday morning and planned to leave Monday. We arrived around mid-afternoon. The cabin was simple. Dark wood exterior, one floor, a metal roof, and a narrow porch that wrapped around the front. No cell signal, but I expected that. It had solar-powered lights and a small generator the owner said we probably wouldn't need. There was a short gravel path leading up to the front steps and nothing but woods beyond that in all directions. It felt isolated, which I liked. My girlfriend was a little more nervous about the lack of service, but she didn't complain. The first 2 days were good. We cooked simple meals, played cards at night, took our time hiking the few trails nearby. There weren't many marked ones, and most were short, but we enjoyed the time outdoors. On Saturday, we decided to explore a little further. We came across the closed trail by accident. We were following a mostly overgrown path along a creek, maybe half a mile from the cabin. It had rained the day before, so the trail was muddy, and we were stepping carefully. That's when we saw the sign. Weathered, leaning, almost hidden behind a fallen tree. It just said closed. Do not enter in faded black paint. No explanation, no mention of danger or fines. Just a single plank nailed to a stake. We stopped for a minute, unsure. The sign looked old. The trail itself looked hardly touched in years. Grass growing through the dirt, branches strewn across it like no one had cleared it in a long time. But it also looked like it went deeper into the woods, away from the creek and toward a ridge we hadn't seen yet. Curiosity got the better of both of us. We stepped over the fallen log and kept going. The trail climbed steadily. The trees got denser the further we walked. The air was cooler, the light dimmer. There were no more trail markers, just faint depressions in the ground and the occasional broken branch. We stayed close together, saying nothing, just listening. It was quiet in a way that didn't feel normal. Not peaceful quiet, heavy, like the trees were holding their breath. After maybe 40 minutes, we reached a clearing. It was strange, completely open, a near-perfect circle in the woods, maybe 30 yards across. The grass in the middle was short, not wild like it should have been. There were no flowers, no brush, just hard-packed dirt in places and a few scattered rocks. And then we saw the cages. There were 6 of them, spaced unevenly around the clearing. All of them rusted, roughly human-sized, and empty. They weren't like animal traps. They looked welded together from heavy steel bars, with small doors that latched shut from the outside. One of them had a length of chain inside, bolted to the floor. Another had thick leather straps on the ground, cracked and dry. A few feet away from that one was a pile of rotted wood that might have once been a bench or table. There were drag marks in the dirt near some of the cages, barely visible but enough to be obvious once we looked closely. Felt wrong. Not just out of place, wrong. Like we'd seen something we weren't meant to. We didn't say anything. We just turned and left. I remember how fast we walked. I kept looking behind us every few steps. It wasn't just fear, it was instinct. Something had changed in the woods around us. I couldn't hear birds anymore. Couldn't hear anything but the sound of our own boots on the ground and the occasional crunch of a branch. We got back to the cabin in under 30 minutes. I locked the front door behind us even though it was the middle of the afternoon. We sat on the couch without speaking for a while. It took until dinner before either of us really said anything, and even then we didn't talk about the cages. We just said maybe we shouldn't go back out tomorrow. Maybe it was time to head home early. That night, I woke up around 2:30 a.m. I didn't know what had woken me. I lay still in bed, eyes open, listening. My girlfriend was asleep beside me, breathing steady. The cabin was dark except for the faint glow of moonlight through the blinds. Everything was quiet at first, but then I heard it. Footsteps, outside. It wasn't an animal. It was the sound of weight shifting on the wooden porch. One slow step at a time, then a pause, then another step. I could feel my heart beating through my chest. I didn't move, just lay there and listened. The steps were deliberate. No scraping or sniffing like you'd hear from a deer or raccoon. Just slow, careful walking. They moved across the front of the cabin, paused again, then I heard the soft creak of one of the porch boards, right in front of the window. I didn't look. Eventually, the footsteps stopped. I waited, counting the seconds. 5 minutes passed. 10. Nothing. I must have stayed awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, until I finally drifted off. The next morning, we found boot prints in the dirt outside. Just one set, circling the cabin. We hadn't walked that side since we arrived, and neither of us owned boots with that tread. The prints went all the way around the cabin, then disappeared into the woods in the direction of the closed trail. We packed that afternoon. I wanted to leave right away, but my girlfriend insisted on resting before the drive, so we stayed one more night. I kept the hatchet by the bed and left the outside lights on. I didn't sleep. I sat by the front window most of the night, staring out into the woods, trying to see past the trees. I never saw anything, but I still felt it, that presence, like someone was watching from just beyond the treeline. We left at first light. The drive down the mountain was slow. The dirt road had washed out in one spot from the earlier rain, so I had to edge around the soft part while keeping the tires from sliding. I glanced in the mirror a lot. No reason, just couldn't help it. I waited a few days before reporting what we found. I sent an email to the Forest Service with the GPS coordinates of the trail and the clearing. I didn't hear back. A week later, I followed up and got a vague reply thanking me for my concern and saying they'd look into it. I haven't heard anything since. I don't know what the cages were for. I don't know who made them or why. And I don't know who was outside the cabin that night, walking slow circles around us like they were waiting for something. I do know one thing. That trail wasn't just closed because it was overgrown. It was closed because someone wanted it to stay forgotten. Like it wasn't part of any official map anymore. Like it had been removed on purpose. And whoever had used that clearing before, I don't think they ever really left. I haven't been back to that part of Idaho since. I've thought about it. I've even looked up the cabin listing once or twice, but it's gone now. Removed from the site. No trace. No old reviews, no photos, like it never existed. Maybe that's for the best. Because if I hadn't found that trail, if we hadn't walked into that clearing, I'd still think the woods were just woods. But now I know better. Some places look like nature took them back, but they're just hiding what was left behind. And sometimes someone's still out there, waiting to make sure you don't look too close.